a suggestion yesterday from Prithvi, which I thought was a brilliant suggestion, that we need, a session of debate and discussion just on Faisal Dev. But after today's readings, I'm thinking of the course as a whole. I was thinking maybe we should have a session of debate and discussion on the different and distinct ways of imagining the nation. Do you like the idea? Because Abhishek had mentioned, tutorials which we haven't done because we are extending the class every day. But we don't really need tutorials. But if we have a 2-hour session of just debate discussion where you speak, it might even help us drop the abstracts and stuff like that and connect the readings with your lecture. You like the idea? Yes. So we have to decide on the day we want that. Yes. Since we do not have anything tomorrow, so it has to be Friday. I don't think, because Saturday there's some session in the afternoon, valedictory or something. So should we think of having it in the afternoon after class? Yes. 2 to 3. It could be 3 to 4, 4:30. Not doesn't even have to be 2 hours. So we'll decide after Abhishek comes, or it can be after the morning session. It depends on you, because we don't normally have lunch before 1. So you decide and let me know. And we can start in the morning and then carry it on if it doesn't get over in the afternoon. So, yes? Okay. So, Friday then. Yes? All of you agree? You see, some of us are at the guest house, so we get to speak a little more. Huh? And not just that, many come up and talk to me while I'm walking back, while I'm walking too. So, I'm getting ideas, but of course, it's mainly our sessions around the table, long conversations when we sit down for tea or dinner, that all these ideas are coming up. Also, when I read today's readings, and I was thinking of the course in general. So I'll start with that, because precisely, today's readings, at least for the first session, what we have are other ways of, imagining not just the nation, but other ways, and very powerful ways on the one hand. And the second is, it's not just on us. What Christopher Pinney is saying is, let's allow the visuals, the images to speak to us. Okay, so we have to keep both in mind. When we imagine, how do we imagine? Yes, but what are the elements also that make us imagine in particular ways? We were talking about the iconography of Hinduism or the goddess, and that's when I was talking about Rabindranath and thinking of the mother as mother goddess. That's precisely what I was actually indicating. That it's not just the way you think. There are all the objects around us, the so-called we think inanimate objects. All the objects around us also have impact on the way we think, feel, sense, live. So that's why Christopher Pinney, as most of you know, is one among the pioneers of visual history, in the sense, as he said, it's not a history of art, but it's a history made by art, and it's a history in the making. So if we think of that, as I said, if we keep both the things in mind as to how we imagine, what I said, how do we know what we know? So how do we know what we know there? Then the impact of all these images, objects are also very important. So that it's the interaction of us wanting to know and images, visuals, also forcing us probably to think in particular ways. So if you keep this in mind, then you would also see why, the thrust of the course, which is on overlapping categories. And both, all the readings today and others are speaking of that the binaries do not work. Why don't these need classificatory in the schema? They do not work because they work as conceptual tools. In social worlds, they don't, because we constantly see that they collapse into each other, and not just that they collapse, as I said, which means that they exist separately and then come together. Their articulations are almost always combined and imbricated, the mutual imbrications. So this, as I said, I would like all of you to think along these lines, even when you comment on Pinney and on Subhadri Ramaswamy and the earlier readings. we started with Said, who was saying precisely that you cannot separate culture and power, which, Veena Das would put much more strongly, taking particular cases. So that, yes. Then Vinny is talking about precisely the combined articulation of religion and politics. He's writing at a time, as you know, when the Ram Janmabhoomi has become very important, and as you also are aware, there was a huge debate on the impact of the serialized Ramayana on national television. Yes, exactly. Yes. So when Pini is saying, let's have the images speak to us, and not just let's have the images speak to us, let's see if we think that the images actually speak to us, then we think of what we think and do very differently. The power of the image in that sense. Because what is the debate otherwise on the serialized Ramayana? Well, precisely, if it had such a tremendous impact, then obviously the images have the power in themselves to convey something, right? So that's what Pinnick is trying to get at. That's what he's saying, that it's not a history, as I said, it's not a history of art that he's wanting to do. It's a history made by art, also a history which is unfinished. And history which is unfinished, that's something we say again and again. Feminist scholars have said it, because you cannot really have the last word in anything. So okay, let's keep that in mind. Before we move into imaginings of the nation. Just before we came, we discussed that we should have, since we haven't had tutorial, the people who are present here agree that we can have a debate and discussion on the different ways of imagining the nation. And in that context, I'm saying not just how we imagine, how all these other, so-called objects also impact on the way we imagine the nation. You agree to that? Friday, we have tentatively thought of Friday. We'll decide on the time. Post-lunch, yes. Yes? Okay, that's fine. Done then. Okay. So as I said, I would like you to, when you comment on Pinny, do that. So the other thing is actually the mutual implication of conceptual categories. So Pinny is speaking both of the overlaps or collapsing or combined articulations of social and political space and religion and politics. Okay, you haven't read the entire book, but what is he trying to say? First, in the introduction, he's mentioning the importance of darshan for Hindu India. And for me, it is so very important because I've worked on Odisha and the Jagannath temple. And as you know, Lord Jagannath is known in Odisha as Chokka Dola, meaning, a person who has huge circular eyes. Chokka Dola. So he's not even, he's also called Kalia endearingly because he's black, but it's more Chokka Dola. So it tells you the power of just the idea of the eyes. And as you also know that in our idea of darshan, it's not just that the deity sees you, you are also in the presence of the deity, right? Both. It's mutual. It's mutual. It is mutual. That's very, very important. So being or going in the presence of, so that this combined kind of effect, again, as I said, how we look at images and what images do to us. So it is, for me, it's absolutely important in Jagannath, the importance of being viewed by going in the presence of the deity, and I see, take darshan, which applies everywhere else, as you know, for gurus and for priests, and whoever you think of as the master. So also keep that in mind. So he's saying, okay, that we can think of as, let's say, religious. But is it only religious? Because he's saying, what are the insights that we can draw from this sight, from this vision? That's one question he's raising, right? The other thing, so he's saying the collapsing of the religious and the political, which he develops more of through the book, not just in the introduction, he just indicates it. What is he saying? He's saying Hindu, particularly Hindu India, is so rich, with iconography of all kinds, right? And which is what, again, I mentioned in relation to Rabindranath. If you have to fall back on some kind of image, you immediately, because you have such a rich and very, diverse array of iconography you can fall back on immediately. You draw upon, consciously or unconsciously, right? So that's what he is also pointing to, and that's why he's pointing to the chromolithographs, and he's talking about the omnipotent presence of the calendars in the India he's writing about. Now they've probably become less. Now none of us probably keep calendars at in our homes with all those photos of gods and goddesses and all that. But he's writing, in the early 90s, he's speaking of India, where he says this omnipresence of these calendars, and he's saying that even let's say a Muslim shopkeeper, he has this tiny little shop, and he has nothing else to adorn it. So all of them turn to calendars, which are given free by as you know, all the companies are making it, and it's something very nice and colorful. So he's saying this is not consciously religious at all. I mean, the Muslim man, in that sense, this is the collapse of the social and the political. He said, is the Muslim man thinking that I am adorning my tiny little shop with the image of a god? No, or a goddess? No. He is thinking that I need some kind of decoration for my shop. We do not know exactly how he's thinking, but the point is, it's not stopping him, because the calendars are the most easily available free stuff. He says, but on the other hand, and this is what the images that he put to us, he says, you go to shops and you see these calendars everywhere, calendars of gods and goddesses everywhere. It has a residual effect. It has a residual effect which we are not conscious of, but it is latent. So he's trying to say it's precisely because of this residual effect that when the Hindu rite is trying to evoke the image of Rama and gods and goddesses, it suddenly becomes very potent as common sense. I hope you're getting what I mean. So this is what the power of the image on us. Says it's something that's almost subconscious. And when I was reading this now, I was reminded of Michael Billig's banal nationalism, where he's speaking of that there are all these sign symbols which are so banal that again we don't pay attention, but they do have a residual effect. Why are they so banal? He said the flag in front of any administrative building, the photos of the leaders, all kinds of stuff like that. He said it's banal, but it keeps alive constantly. It's almost like a constant everyday recreation of some sense of the nation state, right? And again, he says that earlier the idea was, it's a very powerful argument. It was written, of course, when he was very angry with the Iraq invasion and all that. And he says the idea is that, in all these established nations, well-established, democratic, secular nations, nationalism is, dead. It comes into force only in moments of crisis. Otherwise, it's forgotten and gone. And that's why he's pointing to this, apparently banal, signs, symbols, visuals of the nation, which come into play with tremendous force at any moment when it's, when they are called into being, because again, the residual effect, like they're every day. And I think, Pinney didn't read, the book hadn't come out, Billig's Banal Nationalism, but I think Pinney is also pointing to that. He said, what does it mean to have all these very colorful lithographs around us all the time? We are moving into, and what do they do to us? So when you suddenly evoke a sense of India being very Hindu and these gods and goddesses as being very powerful, it becomes common sense very easily. So from there, and Pinney is not directly saying that, I extend it a little more to say, what does it mean, therefore, to separate, religion into public and private? Where are these gods and goddesses, right? Where do we hang our calendars? It's public space. So can you really say that, this part, this is religious? Is it really religious? That's what also Pitney is asking. Can we clearly separate the social, the political, and the public space and the private space? If we were to say that, you cannot have religion come in, right, into or invade the public space, what will happen to all these events? And then, is it really religion? When, as I said, and that's why he mentions that a Muslim, shop owner, he has nothing else to adorn his stall. He goes gets a calendar. Is that a religious act on his part? No. But the others who are coming, as I said, the idea of those images, and hence, being in the sight of, seeing and being seen. And that's that is the kind of, he's saying, we, rather than sight, we should also think of the insights that come out. So think about that. Even the churches, I live in Mexico City. So you have churches everywhere. Now, the point is, people will say, see church attendance. There is churches attendance as well in Mexico City on Sundays. Some, not too many people, but that's not the point. The Virgin of Guadalupe. If you go past any old building, any old large building, they all have niches out on the street with the Virgin of Guadalupe, and people still put flowers or lamps and stuff like that. Think of our temples, the tiny ones, everywhere, under the trees. Everywhere, Shani Thakur, this Thakur, that Thakur, and people go put, the goddesses go put sindoor sometimes, right? Sometimes there's not even a separate image, just the trunk of the tree where you carve out, right? So again, as I said, if we reflect, does the separation of, public space, private space, religion, politics, in that sense, does it work? My question is, does it work anywhere? In that sense, public, private. So these are the things Pitney is pointing to in the course of the book. As I said, although his central concern, given the time he's writing, is why the serialized Ramayana had the tremendous effect in it. And he's just indicating that this was residual, this was latent, and this is something, as I said, it's so banal that you never think about it, but it stays with us. Why something that we didn't think exists can become, national common sense very quickly. So I think right now I'll stop at that before moving on to Sumati Ramaswamy, because I want your comments. Yes.
I have a certain doubt with this banal effect or the residual effect, because I read it somewhere that when the European art school started teaching this, the naturalized sort of painting and bringing in perspectivism, so initially that became popular because the Calcutta Art School was also the teaching. But then after that it became slightly unpopular because it did not really hold too much ground with the masses. Because there was no eye contact between the people who would watch it and the image. So the whole idea of darshan was important. So, and that is the same iconography we see in the calendar art. Unless the deity looks it, the onlooker, the calendar art doesn't look like calendar art.
Yes.
So this banal effect, how can we call this a residual effect when it is actually working as an idol?
See, the banal effect, he doesn't go into the banal effect at all. Pitney is speaking of the residual effect. I was talking about Michael Billig's banal effect. Yes. No, Pitney, as I said, the book hadn't even come out when he's writing, and even if it did, I don't know whether he would have been interested in reading it, right? but it is for you, if you want to read it, it is, and although it's a little old now, it is an interesting argument that he's making.
Because I could use the banal effect.
No. For Pitney, it's the residual effect.
So what exactly does he mean by the residual?
It's like a sedimented kind of common sense that exists. Like if you think you suddenly want to constitute a majority that is Hindu, it's almost evident. It's like you don't have to explain to anybody, right? And the way and not just that, we're speaking also of the way the actors and actresses were invited to join the BJP. is also speaking. That is vegan, yes. So that is not residual. But he's saying it. The residual effect is that people identify it or with it almost spontaneously. You know, we had all those stories of how people would get up and do the snan and puja, and in television screens they would also do puja.
Even my grandma also, 55 years back, I think still today I can remember this thing. My grandma, offers some flowers in front of the television.
Exactly.
Black video. So she offered some flowers in front of this television serial.
Yes, exactly. You
It's
most
not a serial for her. Okay, you're just like
take the microphone, please, because
it was not a serial for her in that time. She offered these flowers, do agarbatti like this, okay? So it was not a just cereal for her.
So that's what he's saying. That is precisely what he's saying. That what is just social and entertainment, what is religious, what is political, right? It's not as if the people watching, for example, your grandmother, is not as if she is consciously thinking she is supporting the BJP. But what he's pointing to is that when the BJP is making use of it, it seems like so common. It's common sense. That no one questions it. That is the recipe. Yes.
As far as the visualization of the myth and the metaphor is concerned, what immediately brings to my mind as I was listening to you, I'm a student of drama and theatre. So in the late medieval Europe, especially I'm talking about the case of England, when the church initially permitted the performances of the morality plays or the miracle plays, where there will be Christ and we know the subjects of what goes on. But then later on, it was the church which came down heavily, on these kinds of performances, and they kind of prohibited. And then gradually the morality plays, traditions, and all, they went out of the domain of the religious and came to the secular. That is how the early modern theatre developed in England. This is one. So it's always in a problematic zone, visualization. But then the authorities at any particular point of time, it will try to control, and it will always try to profit on that. And as far as your references to this this Hindu deity culture and all these things, what again interests me is a slight feature in the story. As far as I know, my community, I'm talking about my linguistic community, the Bengalis, we all have most of us, in our homes, we have all that private space of worship, compared to other religious communities where there is a centralized space for worship. You go and attend that place of worship every one day in a week or something like that. But then many Hindus, especially a large share of the Bengalis, we have our private spaces of worship. We do regular worship over there rather than going to once in a week kind of a thing. So that, in a way, is a counter narrative. Counter narrative to as much as I could gather on what you were speaking, that if we are thinking about a nationalism based on the ideas of religion, where iconography or these photographs play a very crucial part. So I do not participate in that particular exercise, but I want to keep my own private interpretation of that nationalism by through the practice of my private worship. So this is what I have, what I'm very anxious.
No, I have no problems with that. We all have. Why Bengalis? Actually, if you go to any South Indian home, in upper caste home, not everyone, we shouldn't generalize either, they always have an altar in the kitchen. I've seen it, and
I think the other religious groups have
Absolutely.
shrines and altars.
Yes.
It's private. But I think for Muslims, the Friday namaz, the Sunday church, the Christians, or for some other, like the 6th, the Sunday Gurdwara, these are part of practices by which they are kept together as a sense of community. It's part and parcel of that sense of community. Why you include your different gods and goddesses more fragmented? You have so many sects also. Isn't that right? You have the Shaivite, you have the Vaishnavite, then you have the Shakti tradition. So it's much more fragmented, and there is no sense of need of keeping the communities together. You know?
A very interesting example is that of Mansa Devi. When I went to Uttarakhand, or when I went to Haridwar for the first time, it was to my art shop that I discovered the way I imagine my Manasa, being a Bengali, a person over here from northeast of Bengal, is a completely different kind of a goddess altogether in the north. The same thing is again with Shitala Devi also. The way I associate my Shitala Devi with a kind of a epidemic disease which had a prevalence in Bengal at a particular point of time. The Shitala Devi in the north is a completely different kind of a goddess altogether. So these are the little fissures in the story, in the grand narrative, which interests me.
No, but there is no grand narrative. I think what Vinny and all of us, we are trying to argue against are the clear separations of conceptual categories which we think actually work in social works, and they don't. That is Vinny's point. That can you really, of course you're consciously doing your private worship, but can you really escape from the presence of these calendars, or these temples, or this tiny, that's what he's pointing. And what kind of impact does it have? So whenever you try, what he's saying is, when in a moment when you think you can conjure up a national consensus, all these images then play a different kind of role in helping to build that consensus without really, you're having to do very much. Right? So yes, Shanta.
What is also interesting is that, as he said, we have a huge pantheon, and from time to time we can see that there's little new inclusions. Like Gamata was a new inclusion and created a huge impact during the Ramchandra over the Ramchandra. Another little new from what she said, like her grandmother's response towards that telescope, and it's yes. So there was this film called Jai Santoshi Ma, and it created a huge impact on the onlookers. I mean, people went to watch this film time and again, and every day they used to carry this flowers and garlands and all, and then they used to leave their shoes outside. And it was the film from the point of view of a student of film studies. It's nothing. I mean, it's as ordinary as possible. But then, from then on, Santoshi Ma became, emerged as a goddess.
Absolutely, and not only did she emerge, I still know of people in my close circle of friends and not family, but anyway, who keep that Santoshi Ma Vrat.
Yes, and these new mantras and new Anjali mantras were being created, and for Gaumata, it is very interesting mantra, and it's funny actually. I mean, all the adjectives, all those positive attributes, and in the image of the Gaumata that became popular during this 90s, the entire Hindu pantheon is located in the body of the cow.
Yes.
And I would say
right now. Yes.
Now I would say nationalist iconography, but the Hindu cultural nationalist iconography actually replaced Bharat Mata with the image of the Gaumata during that period.
Yes.
And the other thing, as you were talking about the calendar art and all, what I guess problematic here is, as you were saying, we have the Bengalis and other communities as well. We have this private sanctified space for worship. There's shrines at every household. But then the figure we worship, of course, it's anthropomorphic from the Puranic tradition. But then the certain contours and countenance that the image has to evoke that fervor, that spiritual, religious fervor in you, so that you can worship. But then the calendar art, especially the Ravi Verma oleographs or Ravi Verma lithographs that became popular, and we have those calendar arts. But he depicted the figures in a very certain kind of way. I mean, sometimes a certain goddess is voluptuous. Sometimes she or he has a different appeal altogether.
Yeah.
but this is not only, I mean, disruptive, but also subversive in a certain manner. So there is also this fissure between the religious and the social acceptance of the film.
Absolutely. You can never control the way anyone sees or even reads, or even, let's say one party with a strong party line, can they really control the way people understand their messages and what they do? No. That, of course, the question of reception is absolutely. But as I said, what Pinny's point is the way that, as I said, you subscribe to it, you don't subscribe to it, no. But suddenly through the, serialized Ramayana and this, let's say the confluence he's speaking of, and he's trying to explain that Mahabharata didn't have that much success. I'm saying the Mahabharata did not have that much success. The Ramayana had tremendous. One, we shouldn't forget something. In a country like India, I mean, it was on the national television. You are too young to know all this. It was started by Indira Gandhi years ago, but then you capture a space on a Sunday morning on all TV channels. Like, you cannot broadcast anything else during that time. So you have to keep in mind all these other factors. When we forget, national television, tremendous significance. The idea of the nation, which is why I said we must have debate and discussion of the various ways we imagine we can give shape to, and what kind of cartographies are we speaking of here. Just the idea, he refers to print culture, of Benedict Anderson, but just the idea of everyone in India, not everyone, but people in all corners of India watching the same program at the same time. What kind of community is it constructing? Yes. So we keep all these things in mind, because as I said, you're probably too young. We know what happened. What you say, we didn't watch the Ramayana. Obviously, the like snobbish Bengalis, who will say, absolutely. We didn't, because it's so foolish, it's so terrible, the actors and actresses with all the gold and silver. Yes.
Along with the sustenance of the so-called Hindu nationalism, media was also the counterpart of the church and the mosque saying, please stop displaying these images. So, I mean, Vinny talks about the Muslim shopkeepers,
It does, it's just an example in the
others, but I also know within the visual discourse itself is a fact that people were actually told, ordered in the mosques and churches not to have these images in the house at all, not to look at these serials at all. I was working with the Catholic Church in 1998. I know all my colleagues mentioned that the church, the priests actually ordered them to switch off their televisions and not watch these serials. It's a fact.
Probably precisely because they were worried about the kind of effect it could have had. That's precisely, the point. Why are they suddenly feeling threatened and asking them not to? Right? Yes.
Yes, so when we say that it was shown in the national TV and it was perceived by the majority of the population of India, then there comes the thing that's what Stuart Hall called encoding and decoding.
Yes.
How the population encoded and how the media person encoded and how the population decoded the entire notion that a certain knowledge was being shown. They followed a certain trend. So in a way, all the majority of the population had the similar notion of what they were shown. It was not that every section of the society had different views. They had the same views. Okay, we have to have respect for that. We have to follow the certain rules. And a Hindu tradition was, in a way, entrusted to the population also.
See, that was the criticism. Because as you know, I'll just give you, come back to you, but let me respond. I agree with you. As I said, you can never have control over reception. Absolutely. Otherwise, what Pinny is also speaking about very strongly falls through. Let's have the images speak to us. Right? So if they don't, and they cannot speak to you in the same way, to all of us. Obviously, that's for sure. But on the other hand, the criticisms were precisely this. We've had very different traditions of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata everywhere. Now, The other thing that was done is soon after the serial, you know, there were condensed versions of the episodes made into cassettes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this I know from personal experience. You know, in the Indian Embassy in Mexico, there was a husband-wife combination. Both of them worked at the embassy, and we got to know them well. And she would say, "Oh, it's this Ramayana thing is brilliant to keep our children occupied because they were embassy people. They had to go out for parties. So, you know, there's so many different series. You know, you just start one episode and they go episode after episode. So, what was the effect? Exactly. For more and more, you know, we are not growing up with the Ramayana stories being told to us by our grandparents, right? That's gone for several generations now. So all the different versions that we had, and particularly for these people and for many others, you know, people in urban India, this became, like what you were saying, precisely the authoritative version of the Vinny is not saying all that. He's just indicating. I'm saying he's talking. Why is there so much discussion around the effect of the serialized Ramayana? And that's why he's saying this residual effect, all that. He's saying when you try to bring that up, you don't even have to explain it to the people because it's there. You know, it's there as common knowledge. So yes, I agree with you completely. Yes,
yeah, coming back to this, that the serialization becomes the only version,
yeah,
the dominant version, and similar effect was created, I think, with sorry. Yeah, I think similar effect was created by Ravi Verma lithographs and would solidified a particular image of a particular god, and circulated it. But that is not what I was trying to point out. I was trying to say that this available and cheap lithographs would actually bring the god in the hands of the common man, in the sense, considering we have a history of no temple entry for Dalits, and and poor people wouldn't have temples to themselves. So it would be the zamindars who would have temples, and entry to that would be restricted. So I think the images and the mass production brought God in the houses of the poor people. And in certain ways, I think this accessibility matter. I mean, I don't think Vinny does talk about that.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't.
That's a very important point.
But I think access to God in a very personal sort of a way, I think was brought about by these images, and I think that's quite important, especially for the Dalits who didn't have entry into the temples.
Yes.
Even by the late 19th century, it wasn't there. So.
Yes, I think that's a very important point. No, Vinny does not go into that.
Yeah.
He's speaking of total art, but obviously he's making a distinction that you can talk about in the introduction. That is not the Soviet. There, I do not agree with Ranajit Guha, not with him, but the way he's citing Ranajit Guha of the split between this elite nationalism and the messianic one of the, let's say, subordinate truth. Why? Because I do not think that there is such a split. I think there is convergence and confluence, and I'll tell you why, and not in relation to visuals, but with relation to, let's say, you think, as I was mentioning, to our idea of time, which will come very soon. Yes. So what is the idea of time? We joke about Kali. It's the last one of the Hindu classical age, which has it's extremely alive. Whether we joke about it, we don't joke about it, it is there. Right, and I'll tell you why. Again, in Orissa, there are these apocryphal texts called Malikas. Malikas are like garlands, right? And they come up whenever there's a natural calamity. They came up during Gandhi's movement also. I mean, within Mahima Dharmi tradition, there's a text ascribed to Bhima Bhoi, who's dead and gone by land, and where the avatar is the combination of Mahima Swami, Gandhi, and Kali. So that's what I'm saying, it's not just collapsing. These are imbricated, completely combined articulations, right? So it's religious, it's political, what is it? So the idea of Kali Yuga being brought to an end by an avatar because not ended, it's extremely potent. And 1999, again, Vishnu Mahapatra with whom, in this sense, we seem to agree on how we think about history and Orissa. Vishnu said that after the 1999 devastating cyclone in Orissa, Malikas again started circulating. Speaking of the apocalypse, the pralaya, and do we really think that it's only the messianic, like the poor ignorant subordinates who buy it? I don't think so. Who's composing that? So that's the other, which is why this is a slight point of this. But we'll speak about time also with modernity, which comes in another lecture. Yes. And then we have to move to.
I have several questions and concerns actually. One thing that really interests me that who are involved in these printings. If you look at Gortala and the printing which is there, it's both Hindus and Muslims who are working there. Okay? So it's not only we are not talking about one single community.
Yes. Absolutely. No, but so that all the others can hear.
So
and I'll have you speak on Gortala. She made a brilliant point yesterday, but after class. By okay, carry on. Yes, sir.
And if you look at the Kalighat paintings as well, there are patterns which talks about this amalgamation of these workers who came, from rural Bengal. Okay, and what more interests me actually the linguistic expression. Okay, which they thought that can go together. Okay, I'm more interested in that linguistic expression. I'll call it a community of artists. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Second thing is about representation and popular culture. So one thing you had talked about is Ramayana, but in my opinion, is Mahabharata is as more, as important as Ramayana. If you look at the politics of Tamil Nadu and MGR got popular because he was seen as a Krishna. He was not seen as MGR at all. So there is one part of it, okay, the politics of performance, which didn't work in Bengal, surprisingly, right? Now it's working. Now our popular performers, they are getting involved in politics. But if you look at the history of Tamil Nadu politics, it was totally different. Another thing is, if you look at the popular movies, there was one called God to See, God to See Great, right? So there's this I think Akshay Kumar, right? So he's supposed to be the god, right? And he comes in a suit and the Ray-Ban glass, and I think it was Paresh Rawal who asked, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Krishna." He's like, "No, you are not Krishna. Where is your Masturi? You're supposed to wear a mukut." So from that, we are already challenging that representation of goddess. And also, if you look at the recent murtis which have been made during this puja, Saraswati puja. I remember looking at a Saraswati murti which got very popular in viral actually. Saraswati, where she was with a laptop riding a scooty. Okay, and it got they had to remove it later because of a lot of pressure from the right-wing community. So it is not like that. There had been one set of thinking or understanding which had been going on. Absolutely not, and times are changing. So yes.
Thank you very much. Again, I say I'm in total agreement. Once more, you can never control reception. Then you're ruling out, Binadas loves the word desire, but I would say imagination, the power to imagine, the power to think for yourself, the power to identify in certain ways, sensibility, imagination, all that you're ruling out if you think that people react to anything, official discourse or non-official discourse or images. Now, the question is, who do these, let's say the other images or even those speak to and how? Right? That would be my question. In the case of Ramayana, as I said, it didn't speak to us, but it did speak to a lot of people. That has been his point. That why is it that it's such a short time, and if we don't forget the history of India, remember the Sikhs were the internal other, but they were the enemies after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. Within just a few years, not even a decade, it's turned. right? So they're just trying to, explore those. But the question is, yes, we let the images speak to us, but how do we grasp, how they are speaking to us when we speak about the standardization being brought about by, by globalization? But the point is, if you wear, a Ray-Ban sunglass in Delhi or in Puerto Rico or in some, small town, someone who's got access to it in Guatemala, what is the power of that object for you, right? Extremely difficult to grasp, but we have to ask those questions. And what you're saying is this: yes, this alternative image, but obviously it had some impact, which is why it had to be. But who did it speak to, right? And how? And how? Yes. More questions on Mini, because there's a lot of, as I said, imaginings and even cartographies are mental cartographies. As I said, when you think of someone, not everyone's watching, but we say think of people all over India watching the same program on several Sunday mornings together. What kind of a collective is coming up just through this very act of the idea? We don't relate to them, we don't know, but we have a sense that people all over India are watching the same program. So I mean, the collective. How do we imagine the collective? How do we constitute sense of identity? These would be our main points, as you know. And as I said, the constant collapse, not collapse, overlaps, coming together and combined articulation. So the religious, the political, the social, they are there in our everyday social worlds. We don't have to look very far to say that they don't work. The Bible means they don't work the way we think they ought to, right? So, yes.
It's also about how people in general want to perceive a particular image. Like, for example, in the case of Srimata Hawkorde, the Vaishnavite sect, there were like notions that there is no proper image of Shankar Deva when he was there, when he was alive. But it was only after his death and gradually the pictures which came up, it was only because of the imagining how a saint would look like.
Yes.
Like with the bare body, with the dhoti and the sandya, long hairs. So that is how the people want to accept a particular kind of belief system, and also their faiths. So it's also about how people want to think forward.
Yes.
Yes, even indigenous cultural system that symbols are very important. Symbols are very important, like how they can change the notion of the people, the masses. So it basically reflects what the masses do. So obviously, the people wants to have an image of somebody.
That's the other point I was talking about, that nothing can function only at a discursive level. Need some element, some palpable, concrete element to. My mother, for example, again, they do not believe in anything, but they had to construct a samadhi mandir, right? My mother, something. Then they have some kind of rituals. Not too many, but you go like the lamb. But you need something to say, I believe in this, and how do I, make known, or how do I relate to it? Yes. More comments? Yes.
What she has been referring to is this is how I never take on this. I would rather like to have a look at this as legitimization of a particular image. As I am also from Assam, so I also do share that particular story that there is no authentic image of Shankar Deva possibly for us to fall back upon. So at a particular point of time, someone might have drawn something, and when people started accepting that slowly, so that has acquired a process of legitimization. Now, many of us, when we imagine or think about Shankar Deva, possibly we try to fall back on that. Relating to this particular thing, what immediately brings to my mind is a recent controversy involving Sai Baba, because many of the Hindus, they will try, and this will have a relation to whatever she has spoken also, like goddess Shantoshi being the latest entrant in the Hindu pantheon of gods and goddesses. So Sai Baba, many of his devotees, they also try to give him a divine image that he is almost a god. Almost a god. But very recently, Shankaracharya, one of the Shankaracharyas of India, he had a strong objection. He doesn't want to, or followers, Shankaracharya's followers, they don't at all will accept Sai Baba as a Hindu legitimate preacher. So this is also very interesting because many of the households which I have visited, especially in Maharashtra, I have come across images of Sai Baba. There are two Sais, Satya Sai and so many of the Hindus, they worship him, but now they are in a state of crisis, where whether to listen to Sai Baba or to remain his devotee, or to listen to Shankaracharya, who has again got a legitimization in the process of the Hindu imagination in India. He is one of the pillars of the Hindu imagination. It is Shankaracharya who went to Kashmir and who had built up that very magnanimous temple at the heart of the city of Srinagar, which gives me my claim on Jammu and Kashmir as an integral part of the Indian territory. So these are always issues about which we are in a state of doubt.
Again, religious or political or both together?
Both together.
And social also, right? These are the questions we have to discuss constantly. Yes. Your name, please, again. Yes. Yeah. I don't know all your
Pratik. I was also reminded of how Anand Pai came up with the Amar Chitra Katha series, and how the comics as a medium of expressing this whole idea of visual medium being related to nation and religion, because he was like watching a quiz show on television and there was some kid who could not answer a question on Hindu mythology. So he came up with this idea of Amar Chitra Katha. And he said that there are Western comics like Superman, Batman and all, but we don't have something Indian, which is on Indian gods and Indian personalities. So then
thank you.
This Amar Chitra Katha, a lot of parents wanted their kids to buy these so that they would get knowledge about Hindu.
Thank you. Yes. Your name?
Pallavi Dasgupta. Ma'am, I'm just reminded of how certain icons can even be symbolic of a community. For instance, in the beginning music of the Kolkata Film Festival, here's a montage of scenes symbolic of Kolkata, and one of them is also that of a picture of the Kalighat Kolkata wala Kali written on a wall along with the symbol. And this is something that I found very interesting, because when we think of Kolkata, we generally associate more secular symbols like the Howrah Bridge and Victoria and all. And even in the recent, there was a controversy about a video of Coldplay, which featured a similar Orientalist production of India. So we haven't moved much from our perspective to there.
That's what I'm trying to say, that this is latent. We forget that it's latent and it can be, kind of used. Not used, I mean, it's unless it's latent, we cannot subscribe to it as easily as we do. So, now, to coming back to your point, you have, Shaloka. No, not Amar Chitra Katha. Have you mentioned something else? Okay, I'll come back to it later. Let's move to, yes, thank you very much. You mentioned something and I thought I wanted to react to that, but it doesn't matter. If it comes back, I'll come back. Now to move on to Sumatri Ramaswamy. Another way of imagining the nation. This is something we've been, hinting at but not talking about. We have and we haven't. Territory, the importance of the sense of territory, which is Faisal's point, which is why I said we should have a debate and discussion on the very distinct ways of imagining the nation and how different images, symbols, rituals, everyday practices also kind of impose themselves on us in different ways to have us imagine the nation or conjure the nation in different ways, or the community as a sense of a collective identity. Okay. So Faisal is saying that that you can think of a nation without necessarily thinking of the territory, so that there's no direct link between soil and blood. Okay. Sumatri Ramaswamy, of course, again, we all, we react to something that's come up. And she's writing this article. David Harley is becoming very important, in in theorizing space in different ways and cut off. So she is reacting to his idea of space as something neutral and kind of objectified and impersonal. So I don't quite agree with that, because the other thing I wanted to say about time and also space, one of the ideas of modernity is that time doesn't have any normative content. When I said that Kali is very real for us, do we really think that time has no normative content now? Think about it, because this is something that has fascinated me for years. What do I mean by normative? If you go back to Satyajit, it's the best in terms of its normative content, and there's a gradual decline. And Kali is meant to be the worst because obviously the normative content. But forget about that. Do we really think that time is absolutely, has no, it's objectified and it's empty? While we speak of good times and bad times, yes.
Just something to provoke thought.
Right?
The world doesn't seem to have a problem with the Tibet issue. It being the decentralized nation in exile. And with His Holiness the Dalai Lama as the spiritual, religious, political leader. Their religious nationalism does not have any negative connotations, and the world at large is happy to, accept and support that kind of conjoining of religion and political and a sense of nationalism. Although ironically it's a nation in exile, decentralized.
Okay, someone would like to react to that. Okay, so anyway, thank you. But nation in exile would actually, but do they really want state? I mean, think of Palestine. Why just do it? But but anyway, I'm saying, are they really pushing for a territorialized nation?
They didn't want some economy, they haven't abandoned the idea of Tibet. They haven't. There's a Tibetan government in exile, which also has elections.
Yes. And the Dalai Lama is respected the world over.
Nobody ever questions the foundation or religious nationalism in this figure. There's a widespread, everybody says. Only, I was just looking at the newspaper, but it's only the Chinese who always say, why are you receiving, why are you engaging with the Dalai Lama? It's always the opposition is always from the Chinese. But otherwise, the world at large has accepted this figure. And nobody thinks pejoratively of religious nationalism as being negative, bad, whatever.
It depends on the context, depends on the kind of impact it has also.
Again, it's an expression of religious nationalism.
As I said, it depends absolutely on the context, how it's come up, where it's come up, and the kind of effect it has, right?
Same for Bhutan as well.
And one question I have, why is discussion of Hindu-Muslim coming into this discussion? Because if we look at the Patachitras, right? So we have seen it's always been Muslims who had
exactly. That was the point I wanted to make. They are all almost always from Medinipur, and they are almost always Muslims. Exactly, and they call themselves so and so Chitrakar, and you're right, and they give you the stories. Absolutely. That was the point. That was my point. Thank you. Exactly, that's the one I wanted to make, and I forgot. Thank you very much. Yes, and not just that. I mean, even I found an image. So many of the sellers, Abid. What's Abid? Is Gulal. Yes, they're still Muslims. The people who make the images for the Ram Leela, many of them are Muslims. Even now. Even with polarization and everything. So, as I said, we don't need to look very far. It depends on how we look at what we're looking for. If you look for something, you will find it. India has almost everything, or in the world has a, yes.
Recently, the forest of Durga, I don't know. Actually,
Even news also.
Oh,
Yes. Thank you. Now, just to come back to Sumati Ramaswamy, as I said, she's arguing against the Hardy's notion of maps as an impersonal space, and she's saying that it's the idea of the body politic that makes it a personalized and a space you can relate to. Now, again, the sense of the map, I'm not so sure that map is necessarily personal one, but I don't want to criticize her on that ground, and I'm not also quite sure in the in the way she's using the map and the geopolitics or the politics. Because there seems, for me, it seems that there's a slippage, right? So then she's referring to Bimola, Shamdeep and Bimola, right? And that's why that's her, kind of founding argument, on which she bases this idea of the body politic, geopolitics. I'll give you another example, and this is because of my mother's connection with the Ramakrishna mission. Nivedita, apparently, when Nivedita said, "What is India? How do I know India?" Vivekananda had told her, "I am condensed India." Again, so there are can be so many different ways of expressing the, like the body politic, or again, is it a cartographic imagination? I'm condensed India. Condensed India. I didn't even know of it, as I said, since I went to a Ramakrishna mission event very recently, and they mentioned it because it was on Nivedita, Sister Nivedita. So, and when I read this, I just read this, and I thought, so what is this then? Condensed India, conflation, condensation. So what's the bigger form? Can he conflate to cover all of India, right? What kind of an imagining? How would you place it? Corporeal? Yes, Shamjyoti.
Yeah, no, I was just, I did my MPhil on two very rare texts, early Indian English novels, and the title was Prince of Destiny, the New Krishna. And the name of the protagonist was very suggestively Bharat. And, during the course of the novel, it was said that he actually epitomizes India. So the body politic of the nation is visualized in a female body, or the embodied, female as the nation, also has this discourse of the male as the nation. And most probably it was during the late 19th, the last decade of the 19th and the early decades of the 20th century. Also used, but the mother form, of course, got the more popularity.
Yes.
So the male form as the condensed nation, I think, is there. It was part of the discourse, but which somehow lost out later on. So, that's the point.
Yes, thank you. So no, I was quite struck, when I heard this. The questions I'd like to raise is precisely, what kind of imagining would this be, right? It's so embodied. So is it totally corporeal, or is he speaking of sentiments? Is he speaking of sensibilities? Is he speaking of sensitivities? Is he speaking of thought? Is he speaking of ideas? So the example she gives, of course, it is, there's desire and passion and all other kinds of emotions embedded. That is what she's trying to say, that we cannot relate to a map. It's impersonal because Sandeep says this, you cannot die for a map, but you can die for Shakti. Which, as I said, she's displacing it slightly because it's moving away from Mother India, because, Bimola and Sandeep is not just, it's not just Mother India or Mother Bengal, but Mother Bengal. And that's why I brought up Amunindran's painting yesterday. There's no sense of the map of India. If you see the original painting, there's absolutely no, not even a hint of the map of India behind it. It's just imagining Bongo Mata, which is then offered in the service of the nation, right? The conflation, which points to another conflation, is the problem with the Bengalis, how Bengal can become India, precisely. Not Amunindran didn't do it. He thought of Bongo Mata, and then it was given to the service of the nation, and it often happened. Bengal and India, the constant kind of conflation of the two. Yes. But to come back to Sumathi Ramaswamy, yes. So she is saying that body politic or geopolitic is much more personal, and and it evokes sentiments, etc., and hence the need of the body, even for the father. You know this. Pitru Bhumi is a very strong, powerful kind of emotion also, and we will try and talk about what happens when this idea of Mother India and Pitru Bhumi come together. Think about it a bit. something, how and what happens to the nation as mother and fatherland. How do they combine or they don't combine? How do they gel or they don't gel? So bodyscapes, therefore, for her is what makes much more sense than the idea of the map. Now, I'll give you again another example which I mentioned yesterday. Rabindranath.
Yeah.
Bangladesher hridoy hote, passion. How are you coming out from the heart of Bengal? And the imagery is completely that of a goddess. And what I said again, was Rabindranath consciously being Hindu? No, I don't think he was. He was falling up again upon the residual effect, something he could draw upon immediately, something that was so known to him, right?
And I think it all started from Anandamon, the icon of the mother goddess, and then it populated across, and of course. But then one thing that that song, the national song, that Vande Mataram, there's this whole idea of the mother, yes, Mataram, but the descriptions, just look at the Yamini and all that, the mother is also full of passion.
Yes.
And this angle of eroticity is something which is imbued within even Bimala.
Yes.
Like, because the nation is an object of desire.
Absolutely.
But then this desire is also sexual in some ways. And so there's this wife-mother conflict at some point of time.
Yes.
So there's eroticity, and then there is a desexualized mother breastfeeding. Sumati also shows a lot of breastfeeding happening as a mother, as the nourisher. So I think there's a conflict not only the male and the female image, which is there, which was there, but also this wife and the mother image.
Absolutely.
What will epitomize the nation? The wife or the mother? Of course, later on Hindu nationalism or whatever nationalism we started pursuing, most probably privileged the mother figure because that's more sanitized.
No, it's not Hindu nationalism. The nationalist discourse, the cultural discourse of nationalism, if you follow it, during when it comes to, let's say, maturity in the second half of the 19th century, it is the wife. It is the notion of the wife as the very much modeled on the Victorian wife as your ideal companion, and not just an accomplished, educated woman, yet who's very different from the European woman because she dedicates her education and accomplishment to the service of the home. The home at this stage is just the basic unit of the nation, the family, the basic unit of the nation. You're right, by the early 20th century, it's definitely the mother who's won over. One. Why? Because the mother now is producing sons to fight for her.
Yes.
So, yes.
One example would be Mother India, the movie.
Absolutely.
And I think even Gopi Chandra refers to as Ananta Yovana, the mother as. So, this sexually, what should I say, more sexualized.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Sorry, you had to. Didn't you raise your hand? No? Okay. So to move back, as I said, when we speak of maps, words dying for nothing. I had another anecdote while I was writing my book. I read so much. It will interest you. When American missionaries first showed a map, the missionaries also got maps. This is India and to Naga head, some group, but the head, the king or prince or whatever you call him, he kind of for a minute, he held his head out like this. So he was asked, so why are you sad, looking at the map of India? So he says that Nagaland is just a tiny dot and we thought we are the center of the world. What am I pointing to? You don't really need a map per se. This comes much later. There were other ways of imagining the idea of Peru Parvati. How, that's why he was so upset. He said, we are so tiny, we are so absolutely, what should I say, have no meaning at all, let's say. Forget about the world. Even within India, I cannot believe it because we thought we are center of the world. Right? So there are, it's not as if, we think that, all this classification of space and all. Yesterday I was talking about the sacred networks. It's not as if there was no idea of, geographies or spaces which are habited. There were. It's only that we haven't been able to kind of pinpoint or not really taken maybe the care, not us, maybe others are doing it to bring them up. When I read the story, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, he was sad. He was sad, but also the realization that we mean nothing.
How is the Asian magic done south? Maybe chronologically.
See, south, I don't think. I mean, if you follow Sumati, it's. I don't think there really is an imagining just of the nation. Speaking of Mother India, she's giving these examples from the textbooks, but her work is also that, Tamil and, the language has been extremely powerful, and she's not calling it nationalism, she's calling it devotion. So she's speaking of competing, let's say, senses of collective identities. She is speaking of competing sense of collective identity from the beginning. But that doesn't mean that everyone subscribes to it either, which is why she's also giving these examples of textbooks. Other thing, basic questions of maps and modernity. She claims that you can talk about. The basic questions about maps and modernity remain unexplored, which is why I gave this example of the Naga head. His sense of their place in the world was so very different. So, but map-mindedness, according to her, is important for modern citizenry, for it to visualize the nation territorially, its spread and size in relation to other nations and cultures. So here we have to discuss about the notion of frontier building in different ways again, which is very important for each nation to claim its particularity, its singularity, its distinctiveness. Frontiers, and how do we construct these frontiers? Is it only geographically, or is it also otherwise? We do it otherwise, and which is why then Faisal comes back with great force, because he's saying there are contours, but not. It's an idea that creates a nation where territory is not that important. So map confirms the empiricity of India as a geobody and naturalizes it as a real entity. Then she's moving on to Mother, the Mother Goddess temple, etc., etc. But the citizen subject stands outside. I think this is an important. We can debate. She's saying that once you have the map and you have someone looking at the map, it's as if the citizen subject is outside that body politic of the nation and looking at it objectively. And then, when does this move happen? When you are inside and passionate about it, and you're willing to die for it. What's the relation? What's the interaction that goes on, or what's the transformation that happens? That when you look at a map objectively and you tell yourself, this is India, and then when you are passionate about it and you're willing to die for a cause and willing to die, and that's the slip which I was thinking, that if she's thinking, she's giving the example of Shudip and Vimola. And then Bharat Mata, I mean, I don't see how they come together. But
like India as a mother is more about protection. Like they see it from the perspective of protecting it. And then when we talk about women and when Vimala is brought in, it's also about the idea of possession. So it is again in conflict with each other. The idea of protecting and the idea of possessing.
Desire. We'll speak about.
I think you possess. That's why you need to protect. Yeah, you get. That's what I think.
Again, the objectification and the eroticism is not there with the image of the mother, which is more like a.
Yes. Cues from what Shomjyoti is saying, and that's why we need a father of the nation. Not too many nations, except for those in South Asia, fathers for a nation. That's very peculiar of South Asian nations.
That's why I said we have to discuss how, the interaction, very interesting interaction of Mother India and Pitru. We haven't come to that. We'll come to it towards the.
What about Mexico? I mean, how do they?
It's the same. Madre Patria. Patria, actually, if you go by the gender, it's male, but it's mother patrimony, right? So it's combined. Again, when we speak of imbricated articulations, even here, we can make a case for gender through this, Madre Patria. So,
but looking at the iconography, I mean, the mother or the wife, or I mean, whichever way. But the idea to serve the nation almost is to go with the banduk in the border and protect it. As if there are no other ways of serving. I mean, the iconography, because she's showing the soldiers going to the border. I reminded of somebody from the ruling dispensation saying that, अपने border पे soldiers खड़े हैं, आप एक के सामने नहीं खड़े हो सकते. During the border.
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, this is the old discourse. You go to serve at the border, and there are no other ways of serving.
Yeah. But so yes, I agree, but that's why I said that. Okay, so that's exactly what I was trying to point to when I said that frontier. How do we construct, mental, actual, physical frontiers when we imagine? Because unless you insist on the particularity of your nation, you can belong to any imagined community. How do you hang on to the idea of the nation state? So powerful. And these are questions that are coming up again and again, which we'll see with the second discussion precisely. Which is why, we always say, nation is inclusive. Exclusion is as important, and it's exclusion not just of the others outside, within. Right. But so Ramaswamy, therefore, is, as I said, speaking of, she's setting up for me a slightly kind of clear separation between the scientific map as impersonal and the geopolitic as personal and the object of desire, possession, whatever you want to call it, dedicate, devotion, right? Which I don't quite agree, because, as I said, there's constant conflation. There's constant conflation. It's only when you see Bharat Mata mapped onto the map of India is when you can, which is what she's talking about, not just of the South, mapped onto the map of India is when you evoke all these passions, different kind of passions. And the last thing I want to say about this proposal, the other way of imagining the nation. I mentioned the economic collective yesterday, right? It starts the first critique of nationalism, which is of colonialism, which is not even nationalist in that sense, because they are completely loyal, but it begins with this idea of economic deprivation and how India is being drained economically. And Swadeshi movement, again, if you see, is the idea of an economic collective that you have. So there's a sense of community which is to economics. We refuse to use, British cloth, British bangles, British, but it's a very economic collective. It is coming together. Even before, you have thought of Bongo Mata or Mother India and all that, or the two are happening simultaneously. That's what. I think it comes a little later. I mean, because the critique of nationalism, not in Bengal, but Nauroji and the others, it's happening in the second half of the 19th century, late 19th century, and this is beginning of the.
I remember the mother came with Anand, which is 1876 or 70.
Yes, but the painting comes later.
Painting comes.
Yes. But anyway, but the other image, which again Manu Goswami's work I found interesting, is the map, Gandhi's Khadi exhibitions, the idea of the collective. So there are different ways of creating even cartographies or evoking senses of. So Manu Goswami is showing very well, and it's a very different India. It's not as if they're following the contours of India, north to south and east. No, they're traveling in different ways, but it is a sense of belonging being evoked through this idea of using something that's hangover, That's ours. That's ours. So another important point she says is maps as bodyscapes facilitate the filial attachment of the citizens to national territory, producing sentiments of longing and belonging that a scientific map cannot possibly generate. As I said, I was not convinced by this clear separation between a scientific, what is a scientific map to begin with, right? Scientific map versus the bodyscape, the nation has bodyscape. And what happens to, let's say, the Sikh diaspora? What kind of, it is, to come back to her point of nation in exile, they completely subscribe even now to the idea of Pakistan when, the movement is dead and gone. So that's another idea of a collective, and again, it's not just in exile, it's completely, but it is there. It is there. They still have their web pages, and it's very, and they are speaking, they're showing images of, the nations. If you read Brian Axel's The Nation's Tortured Body. Right. So that's what there. Sorry. Yes.
I also the demarcation, like that someone said, that the conflict between him, the image of him, wife and mother. But in a way, the line of demarcation between a wife and a mother ceases when the concept they talk about the sari, the colonial construction of how the clothing plays an important role. But in a way, they were the women was seen as quote unquote Bharatiya Nari, like the image that was put on a map. That image was a stereotype image of a Bharatiya Nari, that a typical upper caste Hindu women. Typing of a woman was that. So in that image, both wife and mother comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah, both mother and the wife comes in. There is no conflict because obviously when we talk about quote unquote Bharatiya Nari, we look at her as a mother, as a wife, devoted wife,
as a married, and almost always as a marriage.
In marriage,
yes.
Married.
Even the jewelry is symptomatic of the marriage. The ritual.
Even the symbol of sari
and sindoor.
Yes.
Especially the red
The ritual significance of it.
Yes. Bring all this in the second session because yes. But this is also the again, to go back to Vinny's point of what kind of impact does it have on us when we see it over and over again in different situations. Not always we are thinking consciously, oh, this is not right, this is not right, this is not right. So it's like that's how you suddenly can create a sense of consensus or common sense or belief, which seems so obvious. How is it so obvious, right? More comments?
Ramaswamy also brings in Mahashweta Devi in her discussion.
Yes, yes.
The best stories of Mahashweta Devi, she talks about the body and body is a site of like violence, again resistance, and again passive submission. So these are also images that we can associate with the Bharat Mata, like resistance, violence, and then submission as well. So
yes. I mean, think of the famous saying, no, "Ma ki chilen, ma ki hoyachen." What was mother like before, and what has become of her?
And the idea of honor associated with women, and that is also the reason why violence and atrocities take place against them, like during partition. How women were raped because of the concept of honor associated with it.
I didn't give you that essay of Beena Das, but I thought because we have to discuss cultural rights. But the other point is that when we're speaking of all these mix-ups, which are, as I said, contradictions are a part of what we think of as contradictions are a part of everyday social events. And there are several people who can live with those contradictions without thinking of them as contradictions. Exactly. So the same thing, mother, Vimola has Shakti and mother in chains, who needs her sons to fight for her. So this mother is both a sense of that gives you power, and yet that mother is now completely, so how do you relate that? If she is Shakti personified, then why and how is she in such terrible shape? Right?
This is precisely the driving force behind the Sampanga's operation in Ahmedabad.
Yes.
From the transformation from the Shashanka Mar to Swashanchari Mar.
No, but as I said, I mean, I don't see someone who's so powerful and to whom you are reverting again to get your power, and yet you're fighting for a mother who's completely, helpless.
No, there is song also, right? তুমি ভয় পেও না মা আমরা প্রতিবাদ করতে পারি, so we will resist and we will free you, that
মা গো ভাবনা কেন আমরা তোমার শান্তি প্রিয় শান্ত ছেলে.
Exactly, I mean that inherent value.
So think of all this imagery. When speaking of violence, remember I told you about, again the endemic nature of violence, Shalokha.
I was thinking, like, when I was reading the essay, it almost seems that she tends to privilege or rather consider the image of a mother goddess or any sort of embodied image as a representation of the nation, as something more inclusive, as something more vibrant, as something more, what should I say, something more productive rather than a cartographic representation of the map. But then, when there's an embodied image, then it is also exclusionary on many registers. Like it becomes upper caste, and it is, I mean, she's invariably fair. On the contrary, you should actually have a dark mother goddess, because we are mostly brown and darkish.
And that is also to answer, partly Viva's question. I don't think there is, in spite of all this talk of the Dravidian South, there's not really any talk of how we envision, let's say, the Dravidian South in, cartography.
And the bejeweledness actually excludes the lower classes and the common women, and the other part is this apotheosization of the female body. I mean, excludes the other religious groups, especially the Muslims, from the iconography, because anything reverential in the human form is not part of the Islamic tradition. So, I mean, that's where I guess, when you have an icon, an embodied image, I think it is also problematic, which I don't think she deals.
As I said, I think in order to set up her argument, she is making this contrast between, the map as a scientific space and the body politic as
a more involved human.
Yes. Forms. Which I don't quite buy. But then she was, as I said, she's arguing against Hardy's, So, yes.
But I think somewhere we are not coming to a very important issue. Which is a very powerful discourse these days. Somehow I believe that I would have raised this issue yesterday also. Somehow I missed that point. What interests me nowadays is a very strong discourse into the fact that the 600 years of the Mohammedan rule, or maybe more than that, that can be looked at the very first period of colonization. Not only why these 200 years of the rule of the Europeans. And then if we are taking that into consideration, I'm just throwing a stone into the hornet's nest. If we take that into our perspective, then this whole idea of imagining the nation in terms of a mother, a very dominant Hindu image with the bindi and all these things that we are discussing. Like yesterday also in our discussion, this particular issue cropped up, whether the kind of Islam which is practiced in India should be the kind of Islam which is practiced in Arabia. Is there are some subtle differences? Is there are some subtle nuances in the kind of Islam that we practice over here? Then this discourse again get hugely problematized until and unless we address those questions, those issues in these kinds of a discussion. For me, we haven't addressed some very powerful questions vis-a-vis the nation at this present point of time.
The nation is a very new concept. We shouldn't forget that. First, to begin with, so to speak of colonization in an earlier period, then the Greeks also came and colonized parts of India. The Syrians also came and colonized parts of India. The Aryans also came and colonized parts of India. Right?
Yeah, then, I'm not. What I'm telling is that we should address these issues. We should talk about
but
these
then
things.
The problem is we are imposing very recent modern categories on periods and events and processes when these concepts still
my
not
problem I'm sorry, my problem is that without answering those things, without addressing those things, without trying to find very powerful replies to those things, can we still go on in this mode? Like we are discussing, that's fine, but then these are some important issues we should be discussing in these kinds of a course.
So then I think we need to decide on what we think of as colonization to begin with, what we think of as nation. That's precisely what we are discussing. I think that I don't think we'll ever come to an agreement on that. But yes, if you're throwing it up, why not? As I said, different ways of imagining the nation. So why don't you think of? Can you speak of, say, India, let's say, from wherever, 15th, 16th century, as a nation in the sense it is understood today?
I won't have replied to this, but then I believe I was thinking about this all this time, that there has been a very long way of thinking about the nation before these Eurocentric notions of cartography arrived in India. Like the idea of the Aryavarta, and you have a discussion of the boundaries and borders of the nation in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, the frontier discourse in the Mahabharata. There is this idea of Arjuna coming to Manipur and to Bhima coming to Nagaland.
But is it nation? Rabindranath is saying in the 19th century that we do not even have, for all the richness we claim for all our languages, we do not have a word for the nation. That we do not have a word that corresponds to the notion of the nation. Yes.
Also, like being a person from literary background, there's a imminent problem in this. I mean, how much of history do you think is there in the Mahabharata? I mean, that would be a gross historicism. I mean, I don't have an answer, but I mean, we have to take this with a pinch of salt. I don't know how much of history is embedded in a literary text. I mean, although we say that this is a representation of that time, but we have to take it with a pinch of salt. That's what I'm saying.
Again, we are limiting history to a very rigorous academic.
Sir, I don't agree, because history, whenever you write history, a bit of fiction is always there. No?
So as much as when you write a fiction, there is a bit of history, but that you cannot strain this out as separate categories.
No, even all this historical text also, this hardcore historical text, all historians they play with fiction and all. So, I mean,
it's not what is the strainer? What is the filter that you use to distinguish history and
fiction?
I mean, that's a long debate.
Why should we?
But first of all, we can't just say that literary texts can't be treated as history. I mean, texts of history. We can't just say that.
They are
biggest techniques in the world. How do we get to know history? Even modern historians are also, looking at Oedipus and other epics and all. Then only, I mean, we just can't say that.
No, that's not the point. The point is, how can we think of a nation when the very idea does not exist for a period? When the very idea does not exist. Can we really do that? Isn't that imposing our concerns on events and processes?
Tagore's idea of a nation, as in many of his, he is a person who always, I believe we all we agree to this. He was tremendously influenced by many of the thoughts and the concepts of the West. So Tagore's conceptualization of the nation, there is possibility of thinking that it is very much influenced by the Western formulations of the idea of a nation state.
You give me a word for the nation in Bangla. Now, forget Tagore.
No, I think what you're saying is that Tagore actually did not believe in the concept of nation state, and even Gandhi did not believe in the concept of the no.
Just allow me a point of time. If Tagore did not believe in the concept of nation, then how can we use a Tagorean premise to discuss the idea of nation?
So he's critiquing nationalism. No, he's saying we do not. No, it's not. He's saying that there is no, there's no word in any of our vernacular. So that's what I'm saying. Just give me a Bangla word for nation. What we mean by the nation.
No, well, regarding the Ramayana and Mahabharata, I mean, these are literary epics, and I think what Abhishek is also saying, and I just want to point out one thing which is very crucial, is that the Ramayana most probably was written keeping Afghanistan in mind. I mean, I think it has come up as a very, very potent historical point, and the Mahabharata is more of an Indo-Gangetic epic. Okay, I mean, that is one of the things. And the other thing about colonization that you pointed out is, I mean, colonization is also something, the structures of colonization is something like you have an absentee ruler in some other country. Now, when we are talking about Muslims invaders, okay, let me use the term, coming and, they did not colonize per se, they did invade, but they did stay back over here. And that is not exactly colonization because they're contributing here, they're living here, they're marrying here, they're having children here, and I mean, they flourish over here. Well, of course, there were oppression and exploitation.
There are two very significant points over here. I believe we should again revisit the notion of settler colonies. This is the point, your first rebuttal to the point that you are making over there. Second important issue is that there are important monuments which have been built by the Britishers also over here, like the Victoria Palace, which you get to see in your own city. So does that make them natives, or do they still remain colonizers?
You also have to
Yeah. So I believe what I'm not contesting. I'm just trying to find out an answer. The very rationale of joining this particular workshop for 6 days was that I will possibly get some certain answers, if not in very concrete terms, but to some certain problems that I live with in my present condition in this country. So that's why I have raised these questions. Otherwise, I would have gone to a temple.
No, the thing is, as I said, the idea of nation is extremely modern and new. So we cannot just impose an idea that didn't exist. We cannot impose our ways of thinking on people who lived in very different times and very different social worlds, and lived and acted and behaved in very different ways. That's Talal Asad. We'll come to that. Talal Asad's point about religion being constructed as a category forever. Said, do we have the means to figure out what it meant to be a Christian in 15th century Europe and what it means to be a Christian in 20th century, in the 20th century, which is why it's constantly changing. So in that sense, the easy answer is I do not think there was any sense of the nation. So there's no point in, and then how do we speak therefore of colonization? That's why if we want to start there, then it began much before, right? They all came at once. First, it was administratively completely divided, right? And the boundaries are shifting. Again, I know Orissa. It's constantly shifting. There's sometimes concentration around Kalinga, then it moves to the south, and the Gangas come from the south. Then the Bhamakaras to the west. It's just moving. The exact contours of Orissa were till very late, and then it becomes part of the Bengal presidency, part goes to the central provinces. Hence the movement for a unified Orissa. So these are very new ideas and concepts, right? As people are reacting to events and processes over there. My problem would be to start there. Now, to come back to Ramayana and Mahabharata, even if you go to Sanskrit literature, Ramayana is the epitome of Kavya. Go speak to anyone who works on Sanskrit literature, is the epitome of Kavya, and hence it cannot be considered as history. Mahabharata, on the other hand, yes, can be considered as history. Yes, but Mahabharata, both Ramayana and Mahabharata, were composed over very long period of time by different authors. We ascribe it to one author, but we do not know actually how they came into existence. Right? Yes. So which period, when, how, we have to raise all those questions if we want to treat it as just one source of history. I agree. What are we talking about? Visuals also change our understandings of social worlds. Visuals change our understanding. Literature, of course, you cannot do social history without literature. Right? We were told that from the beginning. People who look at temples, people who look at architecture, all of them, how else do you, right? And the other point is, it is interpretation. I would agree to that. There's nothing like pure objective history. But having said that, there's also a rigor of the discipline. You cannot just put forward anything as history because it's based on your interpretation. You have to follow a rigorous method and then, come to your interpretation. Yes. All of it is interpreted. What are we doing, right? This is our understanding. We're trying to make sense of our social worlds. I mean, for me at least, that's how it is. So I think these are the questions. So think about, when and how nation, the idea of a nation comes in. It did not exist. It did not really exist. Shivaji is made into this great hero. Now I'll give you one example. If, he was fighting, the members of his family who were supporting him. That's the part of the story we never talk about. Why don't we talk about it? Right? So were they traitors? No, they were not traitors because there was no sense of the nation there. It was, I do not get along with him. So it's the same thing. So if he is in, if he's fighting with this person as the enemy, so I go make, we forget. That's the sad
part. The funny part is, Tipu Sultan invited Napoleon to invade India. And what if Napoleon would have reached India and we would have been a French colony? So we wouldn't have considered him as nationalist in that sense then. Yeah. But now we do consider Tipu Sultan as a great nationalist because he fought the British. Of course, he was defeated, but he did fight. So,
it was a choice between the British colony and the English colony.
No, I don't think it's a matter of better or worse. I think it's a matter of contingent historical situations where, this idea of patriotism in certain ways which we discuss.
Napoleon was asked to settle there and colonize or would have helped with the battle in Khobar. Isn't that right?
No, Napoleon has basically with the
British came and settled in Khobar, unlike the French who left.
Well, I mean, that is something I also feel about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, that he went to Japan and they would have just come and colonized us. I mean, it was easy cake to eat. I mean, so I think.
No, he was kicked out before. I'm sorry.
He was kicked out much.
Gandhi had serious problems with him, whatever the reason, I don't know. We never know. But
so I don't think they would have left. But these are all, of course, very speculative questions.
Yeah, they're speculative. But my point is that, can we really think of a nation, India as a nation at a time when the very idea of nation doesn't exist?
So, nation, what kind of a nation I rather request you to elaborate on that. Political nation, a nation state, a cultural, because for the first couple of days of our workshop, we have been discussing substantially about the nation, about the idea of cultural nation. So, if it is so, then I would again presume, to the chagrin of many of us who are present over here, that this subcontinent always thrived or always had an idea of cultural nation, which many of us will find it a little difficult to subscribe to these days, keeping their individual situation or ideologies in mind. But in Europe also, when this concept of a nation, imagining the nation came up, they will also fall back to their past epics. For me, being a student of English literature, I know that much of the idea of imagining the English nation can be ascribed to the Arthurian legends, the legendary Arthur and his knights. So.
Don't worry. But that's exactly what I said when I mentioned yesterday that nation is very new. But the problem with the concept of the nation is that it's constantly trying to prove that it's existed from time immemorial, and that was the tautology I was talking about. And even though we all are aware that it's very new, we also believe that it's existed from time immemorial, and we draw upon particular elements to show that it has existed from time immemorial. Now, Ramayana Mahabharata, Sanskrit was not a spoken language, ever. It was a court language. We don't know exactly what kind of languages were spoken. Sanskrit was a cosmopolitan language in the sense it was spoken in, it was a language of literature, literally, but in the courts. If you look closely at Sanskrit literature, the kings are speaking in Sanskrit, not even the queens. Okay? So, when we try to construct a notion of a classical Sanskritic tradition, what are we talking about? Right? And we have to ask these questions. Good that you raised it, right? Okay. History of the vernaculars do not begin before the 10th, 11th centuries. actually the text we can mark out separately. They were all combined. No, some people say Bengali, Odisha, Odia, and Assamese have come from Magadi. I heard it here. Someone was mentioned. Oh, they all originated from Magadi. Bengalis and Odias, there was a time when they were fighting viciously to prove that Jayadev was, Odia or Bengali, right?
Same thing with Rasgulla.
Yeah, this I was going to say that it has now descended to the Rasgulla. So, as I said, the problem is we're trying to construct vernaculars, but we have to keep this in mind. So, these people, why do we say that the history of vernaculars begin from the, let's say, earliest 10th, 11th centuries? We say it because then the vernaculars become a language of literary expression. Does not mean that they didn't exist before. If Sanskrit was not spoken by the majority of the people, then what did they speak? Right? They spoke something, which is why the South has been claiming that their languages are much older, and it is true. We are speaking of the North Indian vernaculars that come up from the 11th, 12th centuries. South, you have literature, Sangam literature, all that much earlier, right? So that. So what are you drawing upon to say common culture? Okay, then settled agriculture. All these castes and everything spreads with settled agriculture. There were parts that were, they had settled agriculture from much before, rise of temples, lands, caste system. There were parts that came into, aggressively into settled agriculture much later. And the parts which were, brought forcibly under, cultivation by the British, right? So we have to think of all this, right? Which is, before we say that we have, I'm not saying there has been, I've spoken about the sacred network. But how did the people relate, to the notion of India, Bharat, whatever you wish to call it, Jamhuri, as it was known then? Can we really ever get it?
I'm also looking for answers to this question, and again, another way, just give us a reference that I have mentioned. Again, one very interesting source of reference would be the travelers, like Yuan Sang and others, who extensively travel all over the continent, subcontinent, and they have recorded. They have recorded cultural commonalities. Of course, there are traditional divisions were there, and many of the kings were in very almost antagonistic towards each other, to that extent that there were constant warfares. These are the blind spots that needs to be
I'm saying if our blind spots are precisely that. We think of the through the lens of a centralized compact state which did not exist. Even if we are speaking of the Mughal empire, Aurangzeb just managed to reach the Deccan, and that completely exhausts the treasury, Mughal treasury. You can't even go beyond that.
Northeast remained beyond the periphery of the Mughal Empire.
Yes, not just the Northeast, even the actual South. It's just the Deccan that barely touching.
The Treaty of Yangon,
1826.
but then only some part of Northeast came of it. All the Madi and Machar was there.
And then the British also venture into the hills, so they will just try to control the plains and all the.
So that is my point. If we start on the premise of a centralized, unified state which did not exist quite in that way, right?
So, Indian state or the state itself?
Sorry?
A centralized state, or do you mean it's an Indian state that don't exist?
I can speak, with authority about the Indian state. I mean, I have to look into other, others.
Bharatvarsha in Hindustan, for example. So I can get your point when you are saying that you can only talk authoritatively about the Indian state, but then there are other nomenclatures for this state also, like
which are not necessarily territorial.
Yes, that's what we are discussing. The entire region from Nepal Tarai to Kachar, to down to Puri formed one compact area. Monastic governmentalities, if you look at Indrani Chatterjee's work. So, there are different ways of belonging. There were different ways of relating to spaces and to cultures. That's the point. It is our conditioning that we think of, the India of today as the India of always. More questions? Okay, thank you. Sorry, we extended. See, the Mexicans claim that there were very close connections between India and Mexico. Yeah, I mean earlier, something like that.